Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works. Today we're back on the Cresta. We've got our new Haltech IC7 to go in, and we're going to be plumbing another overflow bottle. Let's get into it. To speed things up a little, we've already pulled the dash cluster out because pulling clusters out is boring. But we pulled the cluster out and we've got it on the bench for a reason. That reason being we're going to trace these copper tracks on the back of the cluster for some of the lights that are currently in the cluster. We're going to integrate that into the IC7 so that we're going to have indicators, high beam and park brake. And the other thing we pick up is the parking light signal so that the dash will have a light input so it knows when to dim the cluster. So that's pretty cool. We've also got indicators, I don't know if I mentioned them, but they're also wired into the IC7. So rather than dig around for hours looking for diagrams, I already did that, couldn't find anything. So yeah, it's super simple to just visually look at the lights. The easiest way is to actually just pull the bulbs out and hold it up to a light source. You can see super easily what's in what position, and then just grab a multimeter and trace the tracks. Most of the globes in this dash run a common earth and then they're positively triggered, but the charge light actually has a ignition power supply and a input from the alternator. So when you're wiring that up, just make sure that you're not just grabbing the generic ground that the rest of the dash cluster lights use. We've got just a generic panel mount light for the charge light. We had a bit of trouble trying to find something that still had an incandescent bulb because the alternator charging system relies on the resistance of that bulb to work properly. Some cars will still charge without a charge light at all. We've previously run it with and without in the Cresta, but without this cluster in the car, it actually charges at a lower voltage, so it's pretty safe to say it needs a charge light to operate correctly. Some people do run a resistor instead of the charge light, but that was all I could get today. I've actually bought that this morning and then mucked around and pre-terminated that, so that's pretty much ready to wire in. But yeah, we're just going to start testing these tracks, and then once we've got the data from here, we'll go over to the car and identify the required wires, and we're just going to cut them off and just terminate them into Deutsch connectors, which we've also already put on the back of the IC7 multi connector, which is actually the same as a Haltech ECU connector as well. So we've saved even more time by reusing these wires. They were actually originally from the Mustang loom in America, I think, and they already had the correct pins on them. So all I've done is just pin them straight into the connector without even having to crimp them. So that's been nice and handy. And then yeah, we've just whacked some standard Deutsch DT4 connectors on the end there. We've still got to put the 2 pins from the charge light into the back of that one. But obviously we haven't put it in yet because you've got to put it through the panel before you can put the connector into that. So nice and simple. We'll mount all that into our fascia, which we've had 3D printed. That's really cool. I'll talk a little bit more about that later because it is really cool. But let's get straight into the cluster and do some testing. Both sides of that are connected to the light. Got our high beam. And as mentioned, obviously that's common ground to a lot of the lights. Let's get chopping. We've got 4 connectors here for the dash. This little yellow one or yeah, slightly off white one, that's actually just for the auto range indicator, so we don't even need to look at that one at all. So we've got the main 3 cluster plugs here. I've already chopped a couple of wires off because I was playing around the other day. We've got the just the paperwork that comes with the IC7 and gives you the pin out of the optional inputs. So I've just numbered the back of the sheet here, and I've already got indicators and a couple other things back on here. So we've just got to, yeah, we're just waiting on the cluster to come back to ID the high beam and the park brake input. So we'll grab them, and the other thing we've got to do while we're here too is get the charge circuit as mentioned previously. So we'll start chopping these wires up now and hopefully we'll be sweet. Gonna pull it back a little bit though, because if we ever do have to connect back to the stock cluster for whatever reason, we've got pins there that we can easily join back to. I don't know why I'd ever want to put the stock cluster back in, but it is nice to have that option should we require it. Snip that off. Charge light, we've got red with a black trace and blue with 2 silver dots. Blue. Which should be on that same connector. Second from the end. So there are female pins. Watch me screw this up. It's going to be fun. It's not advised to use the roof of your car as a workspace, but the old paint on the Cresta is pretty thrashed, so it will one day get a paint job. As you can see, there's a sweet touch up here, which has actually ripped the paint off previously. That's a piece of vinyl sticker. It just covers the paint thrashing. So while there's a lot of love for the Cresta, there's not a lot of love for the paint, but one day that'll change. Just picking all the factory wires out that we need currently. I nearly committed the cardinal sin there by cutting multiple wires at the same time. I haven't actually got the battery disconnected at the moment, so there's a fair chance there'll be positives and grounds in there somewhere, so highly recommend not cutting multiple wires at once, even though it's a nice way to get the length. We're just going to cut them one at a time now that I've actually thought about what I'm doing, rather than just blazing through a loom with side cutters. So I'm just going to quickly snip them one at a time without blowing fuses. The fun times come when we get to mount our fascia. As I mentioned previously, this is a 3D printed fascia. The guys at 3D Racing Solutions actually custom made this for us to suit our IC7. They do a range of vehicles, mostly Japanese manufactured vehicles, but they're also branching out into some Australian built cars as well. I'm pretty sure they do Commodores and things like that now as well, so that's pretty cool. They do build one-off stuff as well if you want to go that way. Generally you have to send them your dash cluster and they'll measure it up. They hand measure every single part of the cluster, so we actually gave them our dash cluster and the cluster hood for them to check it all out. So we're going to screw this sucker in, then we're going to mount our IC7. I'm stoked with the fitment of our IC7 into the factory dash. While it doesn't quite look factory, obviously, because it's a newer display, the fitment is really good. The guys at 3D Race Solutions did a really nice print for our surround. That's gone in really well, so thanks again to those guys. We're not going to actually cover the configuration and setup of the dash because Haltech actually have a really, really good video on that. I actually watched it to learn how to set the dash up, and I feel like they can probably discuss it better than we can, so I highly recommend watching their setup video. We're going to put a link in the description to that video and to the Haltech channel so that you can check out that and all their other crazy videos. We're done with the IC7 side of it, so now we're going to jump onto our cooling system overflow tank. We're actually going to reuse this part of the fitting, so we've taken the 180 off, which we're going to use now on the bottom of the new overflow bottle. We're actually just going to whack a 90 on that because we do have a T-piece to go onto the radiator as well. You may be wondering why we're putting another overflow bottle on. These bottles probably aren't quite big enough for what we actually need, so when this coolant expands, the volume that the engine and the radiator hold, the expansion volume is actually bigger than the volume of the overflow. So rather than reinventing the wheel and putting a bigger overflow or actually having to make something, we just grabbed another overflow the same as what we already had. We're just going to run a T, and then we'll just run the symmetrical one on the passenger side, so they'll be basically exactly the same. Then we can just keep plumbing them up with a bit more dash 3. As usual with project cars, things don't always go to original plans. Unfortunately, there's not actually enough room to put the overflow bottle in on the passenger side, so we're going to mount them both together on the driver's side in a guard. So that means that this T-piece fitting that we were going to run on the radiator is actually going to end up on the bottom of the overflow. So rather than running 2 lots of hose all the way from the radiator cap and down, basically side by side, we're just going to tee it off on the bottom side of the overflow bottle, and that'll get us out of trouble. Had a pretty easy day today. We've got our IC7 mounted in our 3D Racing Solutions mount. That's gone in really well. I'm really happy with how it's gone in. We've also now mounted a secondary coolant overflow, which is linked to the primary one. We were originally going to put it on the left-hand side of the radiator, but there's not quite enough room because the intercooler piping's obviously routed differently left to right. So we've put them both on the driver's side of the bay. They're plumbed in. We've just done a fan cycle and everything's happy. We've now got all the air out of the hosing, and the coolant level's pretty good in both bottles. It should be almost identical in both bottles, being that they're linked. So we're going to get out of here. Just a reminder too, we are going to be at Summer Nats. We're pretty stoked to have the car back for Summer Nats this year. Last year, unfortunately, we didn't make it. So we're going to be there ripping up Skid Row. We're also probably going to be hanging out in the Haltech dyno cell at some point. Going to get stomped by Maria's 7 million horsepower Falcon, which is super cool. So we'll definitely be there having a good time. If you're in Canberra, definitely come and check it out. Come say hi. We'll be there. We're not going to have any merch, but if you do want to grab some merch, just jump on our website, bennyscustomworks.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.